Welcome back to Shadowy Stories. Welcome to Shadowy Stories. When I was a kid, my mom used to take me to the community pool. She and the other moms would do water aerobics in the afternoons, and I'd splash around in the shallow end with the other kids. It was a great place, with multiple slides, brightly colored murals, and even a small theme park area they called the Jungle Cave. It had sprinklers, a bubble machine, mood lighting, and a little speaker that played jungle sounds, complete with model parrots, elephants, and tigers. To a 6-year-old me, it was heaven. But the place wasn't built very well. One time, as I was sitting there, a section of the cement wall crumbled, and a disc-shaped chunk of concrete hit me on the base of my skull, knocking me unconscious and into the water. I watched the green glow of the lights filtering through the water as my lungs failed, and I started to black out. They didn't notice me until blood started coming out the other end. I was underwater, oxygen deprived, for about 4 minutes before they pulled me out. That's how I lost my sense of taste. They call it ageusia, permanent brain damage from the incident. I'm fine otherwise, but you don't realize how much of a person's life revolves around taste. For example, I remember the last flavor I ever tasted, a piece of strawberry mint gum my mom gave me in the changing room. All these years later, I still remember that flavor, and I'm reminded of it whenever I see the color pink and green mixed together. I can only tell the difference in food by texture. Some textures better than others, but I can't differentiate sweet, salty, or sour. I can sort of sense spicy, but it's not a taste, just a feeling of pain. Mom sued the city after the accident, and we moved from New England to a small town in West Virginia that got a job in metal fabrication. And Mom worked part-time at a travel agency. The change was devastating to my budding social life. I went to high school surrounded by strangers, and my thick New England accent, which I tried to hide, made me stand out even more. High school is hard enough, but it's a nightmare for a kid who can't taste. Some jerks would sneak dish soap into my food, which I wouldn't notice until I got sick. They'd just watch me eat it and laugh. I made the mistake once of saying I liked classic Coke. I was just trying to say something relatable, to fit in, and they gave me a cup full of red pepper flakes. I couldn't tell, and from that day on, they called me Classic Coke and used the name to mock me. I want to tell you about what happened my senior year of high school. Early in the fall, we had indoor swimming lessons, and for the next 3 classes, we were in there doing CPR training and swimming drills. I would have skipped it. I didn't like the idea of my classmates seeing me in swim trunks. And what's more, I developed a complex about water after the accident. Being near or in water would make my breathing deepen and my heart start racing, and I couldn't make it stop. Call it a phobia or some sort of mental illness, but I couldn't get out of it. My gym teacher, Mr. Baker, was strict. He wouldn't even discuss it without a doctor's note. Because I didn't own any gear, I had to borrow some old stuff they kept in the gym's storage room that had been there for years. The clothes were way too big for me, and ancient. The first class was awful for me. I showed up in these borrowed, knee-length, cherry purple swim trunks. We started with a few CPR exercises on a training dummy, and I was chosen to go first, I guess because I couldn't taste the plastic anyway. Then came the swimming drills, and while my classmates completed their exercises as planned in the deep end, I couldn't. I stayed in the shallow end doing kiddie stuff. There was even a big-mouthed bass toy in the pool that, whenever I swam by it, would trigger the fish to start singing. They all laughed whenever that little tune started to play. I asked Mr. Baker if they could remove the toy fish, but he just urged me to stop making a fuss and get my laps and sigh. The second class was worse. I was forced to swim in the deep end and had a panic attack, feeling starved of oxygen, like I couldn't pull air into my lungs. I screamed for help, and Mr. Baker had to drag me to the shallow end, me clinging to him like a scared kitten. I couldn't face my classmates after that, and they had a few new trials for me. Someone implied that I might have peed myself from fear, which I hadn't, but that didn't stop them from saying it. Needless to say, there was absolutely no way I was going to the 3rd class on the morning of the 3rd lesson. I chugged some dish soap and proceeded to throw up in the bathroom. I couldn't taste it anyway. It was probably no different than orange juice. My mom called me in sick, and I spent the day at home. I think she knew I was faking it. But maybe she also realized if I was willing to drink dish soap to get out of something, it was probably pretty bad anyway. I had a pleasant day. I watched movies, listened to music, and caught up on my favorite comic books, the kind of things people do on a rainy day. When I returned to class the next day, I was informed I'd have to complete the mandatory third class at a later date, but thank God. Before that could happen, the pool was shut down. Turns out, a minor geological event had caused some groundwater to leak in, and parasites were detected in the water. Nothing too serious, but you definitely shouldn't swim in it. You might get some bug bites. That's when things started getting weird. A few students got pulled out of class by security for sneaking into the pool area at night. No one really cared much. It was just kids being kids. But I could tell something was off. They weren't looking for a place to party. They had Miller's house for that. He was a rich kid. His dad was out of town 6 days a week, so I started noticing the whispers in the hallways. They weren't saying anything directly, but I would catch snippets. Hints that something was happening. There were kids on the basketball team. I overheard some of their whispers outside the gym. "Are you going to see it?" one whispered. "Going as soon as I get a chance," he replied with a grin. "Can't wait. They're watching the place." "Nah, they only watch for people coming and going," the other responded. "If we get in during the day and stay overnight, they won't notice." They Ray by the book types. This might not seem like a big deal. They were paying attention in class, answering questions, then retreating to shadowy corners of the school to plot and whisper. Clearly something was brewing. And while I wasn't privy to what I was concerned, the creepy part came during math class when, as Mrs. Harris was walking us through some equations, one of my classmates, Noah, just stood up. Everyone turned to him. "Noah, is there a problem?" Mrs. Harris said. He just looked at the teacher, raised his hand as if to ask permission, and then proceeded to make a horrific sound and vomit all over the floor. The others watched him with disgust, but not because he threw up. It was like they were offended. I overheard a cheerleader whisper to her friend, "He's out. It said it doesn't want him." Who doesn't want him? There were other signs. I guess little core groups started recruiting new members. Even sophomores and freshmen people were being invited out. More and more people were being inducted into whatever this thing was that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was connected to the pool area. Somehow, whatever it was clearly happening there. The clue for me came in the locker room before basketball practice. A kid named Carter pulled out what looked like a metal snuff box filled with a dark purple powder. He licked his thumb, dipped it in, and ran it across his tongue. One of his buddies watched him with amazement. They spoke in hushed tones. "Does it actually work?" "Yeah, like I can hear it, like it's right here." I would have asked them what the deal was, but I couldn't. If they wanted me in, they would have reached out. I watched them put this weird stuff in their lockers. One guy brought in a bag of fertilizer. Another brought a couple of sleeping bags. A girl brought frogs from the nearby pond. And flowers, lots of flowers. Tulips, petunias, violets, even some of those novelty blue sunflowers from the train station gift shop. They cram entire bouquets into their locker, and the next day, the flowers would be gone. They brought stuff in, but didn't bring stuff out. Where was it all going? I wanted to check out the pool for myself, but I didn't have an opportunity. Teachers monitored the place during the day, and there were security guards patrolling at night. So while the students were clearly able to gain entry, I couldn't figure out how they were doing it. It all happened so fast, a couple of weeks at most. And some people had radically changed. There was this guy Oliver, for instance. He used to be a thorn in everyone's side in his class. Then, all of a sudden, he became a model student. He even started addressing teachers as sir and ma'am. People started to suspect something was wrong at home. But it wasn't that, he just changed. While the others weren't sure what was going on, or why, I had a sneaking suspicion. It had something to do with that closed-off pool area. Too much was converging on that area for it to be a coincidence. And I was positive Oliver was one of the first to be invited in. I finally worked up the courage and approached some of the more compassionate girls after class. One day they looked at me like I was an alien. "Hey," I said, "are any of you going to the pool? It's closed. Don't you know?" But I looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I know some people still go there. You go too, right? Why would you want to go? Aren't you, like, terrified of the water?" they said. "I just want to see what's going on. Everyone's going, right?" "Yeah, but not everyone. Like you." It seemed even the more compassionate ones in my class were no exception. Some people stayed after school under the guise of needing extra help with their classes, which the teachers allowed and even encouraged. I guess they used this as an excuse to sneak into the pool, but I couldn't be sure. I couldn't come up with a good excuse to stay behind myself, since, well, I was typically the first one out the door in most of my classes, so I had to employ the opposite tactic. Detention. So I cheated on a quiz, copied my neighbor's answers, didn't even try to hide it, and sure enough, detention. The school looked different at night, eerie and spooky. The hallways seemed longer, and without the hustle and bustle of people coming and going. Every footstep echoed with startling clarity. When I finished my detention, I managed to slip away to see if I could find anyone passing by the pool. I saw the door was locked with caution tape pulled across. The caution tape wasn't broken, so they weren't getting in from here. As I lingered there, I turned to see a figure at the end of the hallway. Oliver, the former troublemaker. He walked towards me, sizing me up with curiosity. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I wanted to see what you guys are all doing," I said. "You're inside, aren't you? Are you sure?" "I don't know, I'm just curious." "Scale of the pyramids." "Yeah, but you have to be sure," he insisted. "Once you're in, there's no going back." "How can I be sure if I don't?" He cut me off. "I'm asking you." "You classic Coke," he sighed. "Are you sure?" "You don't sound sure." We just stared at each other for a moment. He was serious. "Yes." I nodded solemnly. I am sure." He took me to the janitor's closet and then proceeded down through a floor hatch. There was an old maintenance access, which handled most of the school's plumbing, that snaked its way back to the pool area. The space was incredibly cramped. I had to turn sideways to fit through, but at the end, there was a locker-sized door that led into the pool area. Stepping out, I didn't know what to say. The plastic covering for the pool was gone. The water was open. They had covered most of the pool floor with dirt. Flowers were scattered on the surface of the water, and the water itself had this sort of purple hue. Electric lanterns were placed around the edges of the pool. A bunch of students were chatting, swimming and playing. A couple was making out in the back. Oliver grabbed my arm. The others looked up at me, some curious, and some confused. "First, you have to go for a swim," he said that as step one. "But the pool is closed. You have to take your clothes off." "I'm not. You said you were sure. This is how you show me you are sure. Strip." So I did, as I peeled off my last sock. One of the guys from the basketball team grabbed my other arm. The onlookers cheered as I was dragged towards the pool. "We have a new friend," they laughed. "Throw him in. They will like you." Another cheered. "Just do it already." Even though I wasn't keen on diving headfirst into what was probably bacteria-infested water, I pleaded with them to slow down, listen to me. But no one listened, and seconds later I was shoved in. A moment of perfect silence, then I broke through the surface, flower petals clinging to me. I could feel the grit of the dirt rubbing against my skin. The water was so deep I could barely see my hands beneath the surface. The others circled around, watching, giggling with excitement, and then something brushed past my leg. I surfaced, gasping for air. I swam towards the shallow end, pushing aside petals and debris. Everyone waited quietly, watching. "It's coming," the cheerleader grinned. "Do you think it'll like him?" As I continued toward the shallow end, I didn't see anyone or anything. Just as my feet touched the dirt, there was a sound, a strange mechanical whirring. I looked up to notice the big-mouthed bass toy bobbing at the far end of the pool. Something had triggered it with its tail. Something was shifting the dirt, and the toy fish was playing that tune. just like it always did. But so creepy in this context, bubbles rose to the surface of the water behind me, then popped. There was a splash somewhere behind me. I turned to see ripples on the surface. I could feel the water moving, like something was pushing forward. I looked at the smiling faces on the shore. My heart was pounding. Why were they so happy? What was it? Suddenly something grabbed my leg. It took me by surprise. I barely had time to take a breath before I was pulled under the surface by something. I only glimpsed it for a moment, a long, worm-like body moving away from my view, each segment unusually long, wider than my torso. I burst to the surface and made for the edge of the pool, but they wouldn't let me out. I told you he couldn't do it, someone shouted. He's going to ruin it all. Kick him back, he needs to stay in longer. They kicked me, pushing me back under wherever I went. Someone was there to push me back. I could feel tentacles, at least four, some grabbing me, others feeling my hair, poking my spine, tickling my feet. A worm-like body slithered behind me, writhing past, and then it grabbed my foot, pulling me under again. It swam around me, clearing the murky water. It pulled me to the bottom of the pool, my ears popping. The thing was at least 20 or 30 feet long. It had this faint purple hue, and as it moved, the water moved with it. It curved itself into a C shape, the lower tentacles gripping me, the top facing me. It had no head. I stared into an open maw, like a Kixeman's mouth, vibrating, perfectly aligned, rodent-like teeth swaying back and forth with each pulse. Its body had these slender, branch-like arms, or tentacles, randomly placed across its body, tipped with 3 clawed fingers. That's what was grabbing me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every bone in my body wanted to break free. I was convinced these people threw me in to be eaten, a sacrifice to this goddamn monster. Is this what they meant by it? It had to be. Vibrations ran through my body. I could feel it. And as I slowly realized, it wasn't just vibrations. It was sound. I thrashed, kicking and screaming, lunging towards the surface. It let go. I broke through the surface, screaming for help, crying and begging for assistance. The people on the shore laughed again, but some also looked confused. I moved towards the diving area, watching the writhing bodies beneath the surface. The others gathered around the edge of the pool, ready to kick me back in. As I looked back at the thing, it suddenly rose out of the water like an angry cobra, towards me, at an alarming speed, almost touching my face. Damn it, someone muttered. You just can't do it, can you? It's beautiful, others exclaimed. Their reactions were mixed, but none of them reacted the way I expected. They were admiring the monster, speaking like it was the most beautiful thing in the world. The boys drooled. The girls looked on in awe. They all crowded around to see what I would do. The monster reached towards me. Several of its slender, branch-like hands touched my arms, then my chest, feeling my rapidly beating heart. It carefully sunk back beneath the surface, this time gently pushing my head down. Just my ears went under, keeping my mouth above water. I could still breathe. It was talking. I could hear it through the vibrations. Listen, it repeated, listen. It was the most surreal moment of my life, lying back, in front of a captivated crowd, like a nightmare I'd never experienced before, feeling the tentacles on my back, my thighs, and my arms. You can't see my form, can you? It asked. I can, I said. I see you. You're seeing another me. It responded. You ray not attuned to my form like they are. Its segmented body pulsed below, then bumped against me as it moved around, the vibrations clear, just slightly distant. You're broken, it continued. You ray flawed. I don't understand. I can't latch onto your tongue. It vibrated. I laid there for at least 10 minutes, just feeling the vibrations. The others relaxed. Some even jumped in and stayed with me, seemingly unafraid. The thing had no name. It was just referred to as it. It didn't want a name, didn't need one. It was frustrated. It had this strange power over everyone else, it seemed, but not me. I didn't understand why, and neither did it. Not until I mentioned my lack of taste. See, human tongues have thousands of taste receptors, which allow the brain to form complex sensations. And apparently this was how it could influence the others. By letting them taste it, it told me a story. There was a cave home to hundreds like it, and in the darkness, the only way to find and distinguish each other was by taste. It's the only thing it could latch onto then. Pressure from below, a fissure, pushed dozens of its kind out into unfamiliar, lonely waters. It searched for others, then found itself sucked into a pipe, where it stayed for days, writhing, listening to us talk in the dark, learning, adapting. It managed to enter the pool. It was closed by then. The water quality was poor, but nowhere near as bad as what it was used to. Chlorine, common in the place where it lived. It wasn't until a few students broke in that it realized it could influence us. The very same thing it used to communicate with its own kind was euphoric to humans, inducing a dreamlike state of euphoria. Even more, but I had no sense of taste. I couldn't experience the sensations. All I could do was hear it. When I stood up, I looked at the others around the pool, and they all spoke in unison. "It lives in our hearts," they said. "We listen." They reached out, ready to pull me in. I couldn't see its other form, the one they saw. But I was in. I was privy to the secret. I was in the know, just like them. Honestly, it was terrifying and wonderful. For the next few weeks, I was one of them. A government official, Daniels, came to check the water quality, and a few students pushed him into the water. Once in, Daniels was just as captivated as the others. They eagerly and willingly lied to protect the secret, keeping the pool closed. I'd talk with the others about it. To them, it was a gorgeous, otherworldly human female, like a siren from a fairy tale, or a mermaid. They couldn't describe it. It just was. I tried to explain how I saw it. A horrifying worm, dozens of feet long, but they couldn't comprehend. In a way, they found it offensive that I would describe its form as a worm. A week before Christmas, I saw Noah in the hallway, the kid who stood up and vomited in class. I asked a girl about it. What did he know? If you're not worthy, it hurts you. It said it was going to kick you out, by making you sick, by taking back what it gave you. He corrected. It just looks gross is all. It all started making sense. The purple powder I saw with the basketball players. It was just the pool water tasting. It gave them a little residual high. Just like swimming with it, they did swim with it. I usually kept my distance, but others would cluster in the water, and the giant worm would writhe among them, touching them. People would laugh and play, and embrace it, and each other. It was like watching a human mosh pit, with a worm-like monster moving between them. At first, I enjoyed being one of them, because I finally fit in. But I didn't really. It started with Oliver. I noticed the lines, these slender lines on his arms. Like the worm's segmentation, his gums looked a bit purple, his eyes red, at first glance. You'd barely notice, but if you spent some time with him, it was obvious. I saw it in the others too. Some developed extra teeth, another's nose shrunk. A girl's fingers grew a few inches. Oliver eventually stopped coming to class. He just sat by the pool all day. His hair, nails, and teeth fell out, and he grew a new set. They started feeding him, mostly fish, but he didn't shy away from raw meat either. He'd just shove it down his throat, and I'd watch his teeth grind in a circular motion, pulping the meat for him to consume. A rumor was spreading. The remaining unaffected staff and students were all going to be dragged into the pool. Together. It wasn't openly discussed, just something those involved seemed to inherently know. A collective subconscious thought. As for me, I was considered compliant. For now, people brought zip ties and rope. Others brought knives and tasers, duct tape, plastic bags, power tools, gearing up for something. It was violent, but it seemed tired of waiting in the dark. The monster wanted to be out in the open, praised and worshipped, no longer a dirty secret. But I felt this crossed a line. A creature seeking survival is one thing, but it seemed to want control over everyone. I wanted to speak up, but I knew the others would silence me, and since I wasn't affected, the only way they could silence me was to kill me. I had to be careful. The night before the planned attack, I joined it in the pool. Just a handful of others were present. It had grown. each segment nearly twice as thick as when I first saw it, its skin rubbery. I waded in, the water reaching my stomach, and I felt it. You disagree, it vibrated. I disagree, I admitted. I don't want anyone to get hurt. They are evolving, it responded. We are all evolving. We're evolving in different ways. I explained, you Ray actually hurting them. Then, a brief pause. I saw the other students pour out from every corner of the room. Had they been waiting? Their eyes seemed brighter. Your desires are different than mine, it explained. You wish to obstruct me, don't you? You shouldn't, you. I didn't get to finish. It suddenly vibrated loudly. Enemy. Screams. Anger. Someone grabbed a hammer. Another a saw. A young girl pulled out clumps of her hair. Crying. Enraged Oliver was at the far end of the room, pounding his chest with his hands like a gorilla. Enemy. It repeated. This time it violently pushed me over like a bowling pin. Some had already jumped into the pool, ready to tear me apart. I had nowhere to go. Dozens of small tentacles grabbed me, pulling me deeper into the pool. It was so fast. I squeezed my eyes shut, only to see this gaping, toothy maw approaching. The teeth moved independently of one another, eager to take a bite out of me. I exhaled every bit of air in my lungs, screaming for it to wait. I wanted to talk, but all that came out were screams. I braced its mouth with my fingertips, struggling not to be swallowed. I felt a tooth pierce my scalp as it grazed my head. It stopped, just like we were affected by it. It seemed to be affected by me. One taste of my blood and it seemed to understand something. It tasted my fear, my despair. It paused, then let me go. I clawed my way to the surface, hot blood running down my face, gasping for air. I saw I was surrounded. More students and some of the faculty gathered around the pool. It rose from the water, its body at least 3 feet longer than when I first encountered it. The others muttered something in unison, seeming not to even see the worm-like monster before them. Then, it said it could leave, make everything go back to normal, but on one condition. All I had to do was borrow my dad's car for something. It seemed simple enough. I was to drive Oliver to the ocean. I woke up early the next day, took my dad's keys, hopped in the car, and backed out. I drove through town to pick up Oliver. He was dripping wet, making a mess of the seats. He didn't say anything. His eyes remained closed. He looked worse in the morning light. We passed through the nearby city and out towards the coast. Oliver didn't say a word. We arrived at a cold winter beach as dusk was approaching. Oliver sat for a while. I sat with him, neither of us seeming to know what would happen next. He trembled, and wept, and shook his head. I could tell he was terrified. Then, suddenly, he went quiet with a newfound resolve. He turned to me. I accept, he said. Our bargain is complete. He put his hand on my chest, just like the monster did in the pool. Then he stood and walked straight into the ocean, stripping off his clothes as he went. The last I saw of Oliver was him wading into the ocean, never to be seen again. The segmentation on his arms was more pronounced. His skin had that rubbery texture. His body had been changing. Back at the school, people got violently ill, vomiting buckets of parasites, just like Noah did in class. The creature in the pool seemed to have withered and died, leaving behind large chunks of petrified stone. Nothing else remained, aside from some dirt and rock grid. It seemed to have kept its promise. What happened after could take hours to explain. For example, the official inquiry attributed our collective madness to us drinking the parasite-infected water, blaming the geological event. Equally strange, there was no fuss, not even a report filed by the police regarding Oliver's disappearance. Of course I was grounded. Stealing my dad's car wasn't a good move, especially when I couldn't explain to them why. Years later, I still get news reports of strange sightings along the coast, mangled sea life, strange circular wounds on whales. A few months ago there was an interview. A diver swore he saw a mermaid. I don't know what that bargain with it really meant, but I can't help but believe I made a terrible mistake. I'm fairly certain now, though, that the worm monster thing didn't end there. On the contrary, I think it's just getting started.